So this morning we're kicking off this brand new series. It is called Heart Conversations, and I am excited about this series just in time for Valentine's Day. And if you have done or you do the Valentine's Day thing, then you may have actually heard of a candy called Conversation Hearts. You may have actually given a candy called Conversation Hearts, or you received one of those candies and you take it and you look at it and you go, why didn't you give me chocolate? Because they don't taste very good. But the point of them, right, is that on these little hearts, they have these little sayings that are meant to kind of express how you feel about another person. They're meant to get a conversation going about what's on and in your heart. And so for years, these little candy hearts have had all sorts of cute little sayings, like this one. Take a look up here. Be mine. Yeah, well, we all want someone who will be ours. Or how about this one? XOXO. My kids ask for that all the time, hugs and kisses. Or how about this one? True love, because that's what we want love to be, right? If we're going to have love, we want it to be true and blue. Or how about this one? Kiss me. There's really not a whole bunch of ambiguity there, right? That's just kind of straightforward and frank. Now, here's the thing. These hearts have all these different sayings. They actually had some sayings on them that I had never heard before. I didn't even know was on these hearts. And so I was doing some research for this message, and I actually came across a real conversation heart. I'm not making this up. That says this. Take a look. Yes, dear. Now, here's the thing. This is probably my favorite conversation heart of all time, because truer words have never been spoken, right? I mean, if you want love to last, if you want it to linger, if you want it to go the distance, gentlemen in the room, there are two words you absolutely must learn. What are the two words? They are, yes, dear. Yeah, good job, guys. Here's the thing. Conversation hearts, the sayings on them are kind of sweet and kind of sentimental, and the colors of them, they're pretty and they're pastel. The problem is that what's on the conversation hearts doesn't always accurately reflect what is in our hearts. Because if we're honest with ourselves, what is in our hearts can be a whole lot darker and a whole lot sharper than what's on those conversation hearts. Real famous words from Jesus. This is from Matthew 15, verse 19. Jesus is talking about the heart. And he says, out of the heart come all sorts of bad things like evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. Jesus says that in our hearts, there can be some real dark and stark stuff. And one of the reasons that I appreciate these words from Jesus so much is that if you're here this morning and your faith is strong and you follow Jesus and you believe in him, you know what Jesus says here is true. Now, if you're here this morning and you got big questions about faith and maybe you're not quite sure about Jesus, you know what you still know? You still know that what Jesus says here is true, because this is just part of the human experience. We all have things that we struggle with in our hearts. We all have stuff that's in our hearts that we kind of wish wasn't in our hearts, and that's why we're doing this series. Because in this series, we're going to be taking a look at some of the dark and stark stuff that is in our hearts so that we can confront it, we can deal with it, we can get it out of us so that we can make room for the good things that belong in our hearts. Now, this morning, as we kick off this series, we're going to be talking about the fear that is in our hearts. Now, when it comes to fear, fear is not just something personal. I would say that fear is actually a societal epidemic because we live in a society that is filled with fear. Pretty much every year, every few years, there's a university out in Orange, California called Chapman University, and they do a survey of American fears. They survey people across the country, and they ask them, what are you afraid of? And this was done a couple of years ago, and here's what Americans said. 74% of the people who responded said, I'm worried, I'm afraid about what's going on in our government. Now, my guess is that number has not changed very much. Maybe it's increased a little bit. Or how about this? 57% of the people surveyed said, I fear what's happening with my money. They don't know if they're going to have enough money for retirement, or they're worried about making it from paycheck to paycheck. Another 57% of the people surveyed said, I fear that I might become sick or I might fall prey to an illness. And with what's going on in China, with the coronavirus, that fear seems very founded. We have fear that is all across our society, and because it's all across our society, it really does have a funny way of making it into our hearts. And that's why today we're going to be talking about fear. Now, to get at this, we're going to be taking a look at a story from the Old Testament, from 2 Kings chapter 6. And this is a story, as we're going to see, that is filled with fear. But here's what I really love about this story. If you just dig underneath the surface, you find out that this story is not only a story that is filled with fear, this story is a story that can actually help us face our fear. And we all need help with that. And so our story for today is 2 Kings 6, beginning at verse 8. Now, the king of Aram was at war with the king of Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place that was indicated by the man of God. Time and time again, Elisha, he's the man of God. He's this prophet in Israel, and he's warning the king so that the king of Israel was on guard whenever he went to a place where the Arameans were. And so as the story unfolds, we're introduced to a couple of different people groups. On the one hand, we have the people group of the Israelites, and they're kind of the big famous people group in the Old Testament. But on the other hand, we have this people group of the Arameans. Now, here's what you need to know about the Arameans. The Arameans weren't so much a nation as they were a tribe. They didn't really have any borders. They didn't have any homes, places where they would kind of put down roots and live off the land. What the Arameans did was they wandered from place to place, and the way they lived is they just pillaged other people, other nations. They would just steal their stuff, take it for themselves, and that's how they would live. There's this real famous statement in Deuteronomy 26, verse 5. It's about a guy named Jacob. And Jacob has 12 sons. These 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Jacob is the father of Israel. He also, in him, has some Aramean blood. He has an Aramean lineage. And so the ancient Israelites would say of Jacob, Deuteronomy 26, verse 5, my father was a what kind of Aramean? He was a wandering Aramean, because that's what Arameans did. They wandered from place to place, and they fought other people to get their stuff. Now, back to 2 Kings 6, it turns out the Arameans have wandered into the Israelite territory, and they're trying to launch a battle against the Israelites in their territory, but they have a problem. There is this prophet in Israel named Elisha, and Elisha always seems to be like 5 steps ahead of the Arameans. He's reporting to the king of Israel the Arameans' next moves, so that by the time the Arameans try to launch a battle plan, the king of Israel is already ready for the battle plan. And this does not make the king of Aram very happy. 2 Kings 6, verse 11, this enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and he demanded of them, tell me, which one of us is on the side of the king of Israel? The king of Aram thinks there's a mole who's feeding information to the Israelites. But one of his officers answers, none of us, my lord the king, but Elisha the prophet, who's in Israel. He tells the king of Israel the very words that you speak, even when you're in your bedroom. You know, one of the attributes of God that theologians will often talk about is God's omniscience. It's just a fancy word that means God knows everything. The words that you speak, God hears them. The actions that you take, God sees them. Even the thoughts that you have, God perceives them. And it seems as though Elisha is getting a little bit of that omniscience from God, because Elisha, as the king is plotting this battle plan, even in his bedroom, Elisha knows what the king of Aram is saying. Elisha understands what the king of Aram is plotting, and so Elisha knows how to get out in front of the king of Aram and protect the nation of Israel, which means that if the Arameans are going to get to the Israelites, the very first person they got to take out is Elisha. And so that's what the king of Aram tries to do. 2 Kings 6, verse 13, go, find out where Elisha is, the king ordered, so I can send some men and capture him. The report came back, he's in Dothan. So the king of Aram sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night, they surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God, that's Elisha's servant, got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots surrounded the city. And the servant said, oh, no, my lord. What shall we do? Imagine the scene for just a moment. You go to bed one night. You're a servant, and then you got Elisha with you. And the next morning you wake up, you step outside, and what do you see? Verse 14 says, you see horses and chariots and a strong force there that is surrounding you. You're just two people. And now, all of a sudden, you have come up against a whole army that probably numbers in the thousands, if not the tens of thousands, and they're coming for you. Now, if you found yourself in that kind of situation, two of you against tens of thousands of people, you tell me, what kind of emotion do you think you would feel? You would probably feel fear. And so this is kind of the peak fear moment in this story. This is when Elisha, this is when a servant, they have to be filled with fear, but it's at this peak fear moment in this story that we actually begin to learn how we can face our fear. And so in the time that we have remaining in this message, I just want to talk about that, because if we dig into the story, we find the story gives us some things, three things that can help us face our fear. Now, we have two different types of fears, right? Sometimes we fear certain things. Other times we fear actual people. And Elisha and his servant, they're afraid of like people, a whole Aramean army. And so rather than talking about what we fear today, we're going to talk about how to face who we fear, how to face the people we fear. And so if you're afraid of somebody in your life, if they kind of worry you, concern you, you need to learn from this story. And so three things we need to face the people we fear. First thing we need to face the people we fear, we need empathy. To face the people we fear, we need empathy. Here's what I want you to keep in mind. Think of a person that you're afraid of. If you got him in your mind, I want you to remember this. Whoever it is that you're afraid of is probably afraid of you too. Because fear, more often than not, actually goes both ways. It goes two ways. We see this with Elisha and his servant. When Elisha and his servant are surrounded by the army of the Arameans, chariots and horsemen, a strong force there, they are feeling fear. But why are they surrounded by chariots and horsemen and a strong force there? Because there's this prophet in Israel who knows what the king of Aram is saying, even in his bedroom. Now, come on, that's kind of freaky, right? And so why do the Arameans send this big army against just two people? Because they too are filled with fear. The Arameans, they're scared of the Israelites. The Israelites, they're scared of the Arameans. Fear goes both ways. And what is true here is true with us too. You know, last weekend we wrapped up this series on how to share your faith. And one of the things we talked about over and over again was how some people who are Christians don't share their faith with people who aren't Christians because of fear. They're worried that maybe if they try to share their faith, someone is going to attack them or belittle them or ask them a question that they can't answer, and so they just kind of recoil in fear. But here's the thing. You know, so often people who are not Christians, they fear people who are Christians. And so even if they have like some big spiritual question that they wish they could ask somebody, they won't and they don't, because they're afraid that if they do, a Christian is going to judge them or come down on them or condemn them or consign them to hell. And so they just kind of recoil in fear. It's fear that goes both ways. This happens in politics all the time, right? People on the left side of the aisle are afraid of people on the right side of the aisle because they're afraid that people on the right side of the aisle are going to wreck the country and ruin their way of life. And people on the right side of the aisle are afraid of people on the left side of the aisle because they're afraid that people on the left side of the aisle are going to wreck the country and ruin their way of life. They're both afraid of the same thing. Both the sides of the aisle are filled with fear, and so they recoil in fear, even though that fear is going both ways. It's when you begin to understand this, that whoever you're afraid of is probably at least a little afraid of you too. It's then that you can begin to experience empathy. Because even if you don't share anything else in common, you at least share this. You share an emotion. You're both scared of each other. And that may make you just a little less scared of them and help you face your fear. That's the first thing you need to face your fear. You need empathy. Second thing you need to face your fear. To face the fear of other people, you need honesty. To face your fear of other people, you need honesty. You know, so often when we think about being afraid of people, we think about all the people out there. But sometimes if we're really honest with ourselves, the person that we're most afraid of is not somebody out there. It's the person who's sitting right where you happen to be sitting right now. Because we have stuff inside of us that causes us to be filled with fear. You know that line from Deuteronomy 26, verse 5, where the Israelites would say of Jacob, "My father is a wandering Aramean." Jacob is the father of the 12 sons of Israel who become the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Jacob is an Israelite, but here's the thing. According to Deuteronomy 26, he's also an Aramean. You know what that means? It means they're like related to each other. It's not that the Israelites are apart from the Arameans. It's that the Israelites are a part of the Arameans, and the Arameans are a part of the Israelites. And so when the Israelites are scared of the Arameans, and the Arameans are scared of the Israelites, they're literally scared of themselves. Because they're related to each other. Do you ever scare yourself? What is it in you that makes you afraid of you? If you don't quite know, let me give you what I call a fear-finding statement, okay? It's a real simple statement. All you got to do is fill in the blanks, and you'll be able to figure out what inside of you makes you afraid of you. Here's how the fear-finding statement goes. If my blank found out about my blank, they wouldn't blank. If my spouse found out about my internet habits, they wouldn't stay with me. You just found your fear. It's the lust that's inside your heart. If my kids found out about my past, you know, all that crazy stuff that I did in college and maybe even a little beyond college, they wouldn't respect me. You just found your fear. It's the shame that's in your heart. If my God found out about my sin, he wouldn't, couldn't, shouldn't love me, save me, be with me. You just found your fear. It's the brokenness that lives inside of you. What is it inside you that makes you scared of you? Here's the thing. Elisha and his servant, they're surrounded by chariots, and I suppose if they wanted to, they could run from the chariots. You know what you can't run from? Yourself. And so if you're scared of yourself, the only thing that you can do is get honest with yourself. The old theological word for this is confession. You just get it all out there on the table. And you say, this hurts me. This burdens me. This scares me. And now that it's out there, I can face it so that I can be filled with less fear. That's the second thing you need to face fear. You need honesty. Third thing you need to face fear, especially when you fear somebody else. When you fear somebody else, you need charity. When you're filled with fear towards somebody else, you need charity. Now, when we last left Elisha and his servant, they were surrounded by the Aramean army, the horses and the chariots and the strong force there. And it kind of makes sense. Elisha's servant begins to freak out a little bit. And so Elisha has to try to calm him down, and this is what he does. He says in 2 Kings 6, verse 16, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prays, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." And the Lord opens Elisha's servant's eyes, and he looks, and he sees the hills are full of horses and chariots of fire. that are all around Elisha. It turns out that on that hillside are not just the horses and the chariots of the Arameans. Also on that hillside are the horses and the chariots of the Lord. There is this angel army that is surrounding Elisha. And the Arameans may just have normal horses and chariots, but you know what the Lord has? He has horses and chariots, the text says, of fire. Now, it's at this point where we kind of all know where this is going, right? I mean, the horses and chariots of the Lord are going to ride into the horses and chariots of the Arameans, and the horses and chariots of the Lord are going to go all Sodom and Gomorrah on the Arameans, right? They're going to burn them up, get rid of them, pulverize them. They'll be done for so that Israel will have nothing left to fear. Except, that's not what happens. 2 Kings 6, verse 18, the Arameans are mounting their chariots, coming toward Elisha, and as the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike this Aramean army with blindness." So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, "This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I'll lead you to the man you're looking for." Now, who are the Arameans looking for again? They're looking for Elisha. And so here's Elisha leading the Arameans down a road as they're looking for Elisha. The Arameans are super confused at this point. And so Elisha, at the end of verse 19, leads them into Samaria. Now, Samaria is the capital city of northern Israel. And so Elisha leads them behind enemy lines into the heart of enemy territory. Verse 20, after they entered the city, Elisha said, "Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see." The Lord opened their eyes and they looked, and there they were, inside enemy lines, inside the capital city of northern Israel, inside Samaria. And who's standing right there in front of them but the very king of Israel? Verse 21, when the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Shall I kill him, my father? Shall I kill him?" Now, it's at this point where we kind of all know what's going to happen, right? Because now the Israelites don't just have one army, they have two armies. They have the chariots of fire of the Lord, and they have their own chariots, and when you put all those chariots together, they can pulverize the Aramean chariots. So they're going to march in, they're going to sweep in, they're going to get rid of those Arameans, they're going to pulverize them so that after they are defeated, Israel will have nothing to fear. Except, that's still not what happens. When the king of Israel gets all excited because he knows that he has the upper hand on the Arameans now, and when he says, "Shall I kill him, my father? Shall I kill him?" Here's how Elisha responds, 2 Kings 6, verse 22, "Do not kill them. Instead, set food and water before them, so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master." So the king of Israel prepared a great feast for them. And after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. Now, it's at this point in the story where if you're reading it, right, you kind of go, wait, what? I mean, this does not seem to be the kind of battle strategy that you would normally use. Because the king of Israel, the Israelites, they have him. They can finally get him. They can finally conquer him. They can finally pulverize him. All they got to do is fight him. But then here's this prophet Elisha who says, "I don't want you to fight them. I want you to feed them. I want you to show that army that is causing you so much fear, I want you to show them, in a word, charity." You know, about 150 years before the prophet Elisha lived, there was this king of Israel, wisest king who ever lived. Solomon was his name. And he wrote this book of wise sayings. And in Proverbs 25, verse 21, he says this, If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. And if he's thirsty, give him water to drink. You see, it's at this moment when Elisha has this big decision to make. Because he can get the Arameans. He has the upper hand. He can send the chariots. Or, to deal with his biggest fear, he can show the Arameans charity. It's at this point and in this place and for this time that Elisha chooses charity. Because here's the thing, Elisha knows something when it comes to fear. And here's what he knows. When it comes to facing the people you are most afraid of, charity works better than chariots. Now, here's where this gets real relevant and real practical for us. Because we all got people we fear, right? Who is it for you? Maybe you're afraid of somebody professionally. You got a job where you think the boss doesn't like you and your coworkers gossip about you. And you need the job, so you can't just quit the job, but you're really worried that one day you're going to go walking in and the boss is going to call you into his office and he's going to say to you, "I'm sorry, you no longer have a place here." And so your heart is filled with fear. Maybe you're here today and you're scared of somebody personally. There's a relationship that maybe kind of fell apart on you. You know the one, the ex-boyfriend or the ex-girlfriend or the ex-husband or the ex-wife. And although you would never, ever say this in church, you know that they crazy, right? And you'll say it to your friends at least. But underneath that statement is just a little fear because you're worried that maybe they're going to try to come after you or get vengeance on you. They're going to try to wreck and ruin something or someone that you hold dear, and so you are filled with fear. It's at these moments that you have a choice to make. To face the one you fear the most. Are you going to shake your fist, yell out loud, mount a chariot? Or are you going to choose charity? Here's the crazy thing about Elisha's choice. This is so insane. He chooses not to fight the Arameans, and you know what? It stinking works. 2 Kings 6 verse 23, so the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. Craziest, most upside down, backwards battle plan ever. It works. Because Elisha knows that charity works better than chariots. And here's why. If Elisha would have opted for the chariots, okay, he may have been able to defeat the Arameans, but you know what would have happened? The Arameans would have still been filled with fear because they were going to be pulverized. If the Arameans would have been able to mount their chariots against the Israelites, the Arameans may have been fine, but the Israelites would have still been filled with fear because they would have been attacked by the Israelites. You see, with a chariot, you can fight fear. But here's what you can't do. You can't fix fear. Only charity can do that. Which is why when a man named Jesus is in a garden called Gethsemane, And this angry mob begins to come for him and toward him because they want to arrest him and they want to take him to court and they want to level false accusations against him. They want to try him. They want to convict him so they can kill him on a cross. When this angry mob begins to come for Jesus and they surround Jesus and his servants, his followers, his disciples, you know what the disciples begin to feel? They begin to feel fear. And it's at this point where one of Jesus' real heady disciples, Peter, he's always out front leading the charge. He wants to know, hey, can we kill him, Jesus? Can we kill him? He whips out his sword, lops off one of the crowd members' ears. And Jesus' response is fascinating. He says in Matthew 26, verse 52, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." And then what he says next is really interesting. He says, "Do you think that I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions, that's 72,000 angels?" It turns out that the same chariots, the same angel army that once surrounded Elisha on a hillside is now surrounding Jesus in a garden. And they're ready to go. And so Jesus has a choice to make. Will he call him out? Will he call him down? Will he fight his fear with chariots? Or will he choose charity? At this moment, in this place, for this time, Jesus chooses charity, and it changes the world. Which is also why, after Jesus is arrested, and after he is tried, and after he's falsely accused, and after he's convicted, and after he's condemned to die on a cross, and after he does die on that cross, and after he's taken down off that cross, and he's put in a tomb, 3 days later, when some ladies come to the tomb to embalm the body, you know what they don't find? A body. You know what they do find? A member of that angel army with a message of resurrection. But you know what the very first thing that angel says to those women is? Matthew 28, verse 5, "Do not be" what? "Afraid." Now, how can the angel say that? I mean, come on. This guy's been crucified, now his body is missing. That really is kind of freaky. That'll make you afraid. How can the angel say that? It's because the angel knows that there was a man who, when he could have chosen chariots, chose charity. And when he did, he not only faced fear, he killed it. 1 John 4, verse 18, perfect charity. Some of you may have learned this as perfect love casts out fear. And so, let me ask you, what you afraid of? Who are you afraid of? I know it's real tempting. Hop in the chariot, go for a ride, go after them, get rid of them, mow them down and smash them down. But before you do that, can I just ask you to try something, okay? Just try it. Just try it. That person that you're scared of, for just a second, hop out of your chariot, put down your sword, and pick up your cross. And here's the thing, if it doesn't work, the chariot will still be right there for you. Just try it. Just try it. And when you do, I want you to remember something. On that cross, when Jesus died, fear died too, so that love could live. And love, not fear, is what belongs in our hearts. Let's stand and pray. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you so much for your Son, who, when he could have chosen chariots to pulverize us, chose charity, and he loved us. And Father, we face a lot of fears in this world and in this life. And so, Father, may we cling to that love, that perfect love that casts out fear as we face our fears. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And now, as you leave this place, go with the one who casts out your fear. Go with him and be blessed. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you, and because you got nothing to fear, he can give you peace, and you can shine like stars in the universe as you hold out God's precious word of life. Amen.